Welcome to Bankruptcy, Through the Looking Glass, with Barry Levine.
Hello, and welcome to Through the Looking Glass with Barry Levine. I'm your host, Katie Roberts, and today we're revealing the truth about creditors in bankruptcy. Barry, thank you so much for being here today.
It's always a pleasure, and discovering your announcement, it's even more exciting.
All right, well, let's jump right in. How are creditors involved in both Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 filings? Follow up, do they have any influence over the process?
Not in the least.
Love it.
The creditors, the court requires us, especially in Chapter 13s, to send notices out to everybody, to send copies of the pleadings out. And what's a postage stamp now? 68 cents, 72 cents. And they don't even read the shit. It's a total waste of time. Chapter 7s, when the notices go out about a Chapter 7, it tells the creditors that this is an assetless case. The last time a creditor showed up at one of the 341 meetings, probably, you can't see the picture behind me, was when I had a lot more hair. Even now, they're done by Zoom. They don't even bother. They do all their nudging and bothering before people file a bankruptcy. They try to be very aggressive. They do this, they call their employers, they do that. As soon as they file, their interest becomes non-existent because the bottom line is they're going to wind up with nothing. And in the Chapter 13s, where you're in a situation where you're proposing a plan to creditors, the only one who gives a shit is the Chapter 13 trustee, who's, basically a bureaucrat. They're from the government and they're here to help. I mean, the creditors themselves, if you had a case where the numbers were such that they should get 50 cents on the dollar, but you proposed 10 cents on the dollar, they wouldn't bat an eyelash. The Chapter 13 trustee would probably file an objection, but the creditors don't give a shit. Really, they don't care. The only one, nowadays in Chapter 13s, the only creditor that now shows up, the Mass Department of Revenue, which is the local revenue taxing authority. They've recently hired a young bunch of kids who are very go-getting, and they show up at the 341 meetings, and mostly in the Chapter 13s where people haven't filed returns, and they're like the school teacher who raps the kid on the knuckles. You have to listen to them, but it's like, yeah, I'm going to file my tax returns. What do you want from my life? And the thing that, of course, which is one of the reasons I tell people I keep Kafka on my desk. They file a case in March, but their tax return isn't due till April 15th. They want to know why they haven't filed it. It's not due yet. That's why I haven't filed it. But you're dealing with annoyances, but by and large, you never hear from the creditors. I mean, in the typical case, the only creditors who may make an appearance, is, let's say you filed a bankruptcy to stop a foreclosure. The person hasn't made their mortgage payments, so they file a motion for relief from stay. The same thing if you have a car that you haven't made a payment on in a long period of time, and they'll file a motion for relief from stay. But by and large, the general secured creditors, they go unheard, unseen, and then what they do to add insult to the poor debtor's injury is, 10 years later, they'll sell the portfolio of debts that their credit card was a part of to some yo-yo who buys it for 10 cents on the dollar, who now makes a demand for payment on them. It's easily dealt with, but, again, one of life's usually comes on a Saturday.
It's like they're gambling with the debts. Like, all right, I bet I can.
Well, there used to be, I don't know if it still existed, but there used to be, somebody gave me a website where you could buy debt in any state for 10 cents on the dollar. So if you're a gambler, I'm not, but if you're a gambler, so you buy a portfolio of debt for 10 cents on the dollar, maybe the credit card or the judgment or whomever you have the claim is a doctor who has a lot of money. On the other hand, maybe it's somebody who filed a bankruptcy and discharged the debt 10 years ago. But if you like to go to the Encore Casino in Boston, I go there generally to eat. The slot machines don't do anything for me.
Yeah, I've been to Vegas a couple times, and I wasn't even.
Well, in Vegas, I saw Siegfried and Roy with the
great.
Lions. It's a long time ago. And who else? Rodney Dangerfield was very good.
Oh, wow, that's really cool. Do creditors actively monitor bankruptcy cases? I know that the outreach tends to stop.
The only case of monitoring that I've come across is, very often when people file a bankruptcy, because listen, in America, to live, if you decide to go to Disney World for whatever reason, you don't want to take, if you don't have a credit card, you don't want to take $2,000 in 20s to leave a deposit for a rent-a-car. So you need a credit card, and very often they'll leave off one credit card from their bankruptcy petition, hoping that it'll, just pass right on through. The only case of monitoring I've found is that sometimes that creditor you haven't listed finds out about your bankruptcy filing and pulls the account. So, I had a guy many decades ago, he needed his American Express card. He had an incredible large balance, and I told him, schmuck, it should be listed in your bankruptcy. He didn't list them. He had just paid them. I think it was either $3,500 or $4,000. They found out about his bankruptcy. They said, thank you for the payment. They closed his account. You just can't make it up. Nobody listens. What can I say?
Nobody listens. Hopefully they're listening now.
Well, if I had a nickel for every time I said, I told you so, I probably would have retired rich.
I am curious about this one. Are creditors generally interested in the outcome of a bankruptcy case? Are they trying to find loops in someone's case?
No, generally they try to get paid as much as they can, if they can get paid, before the person files a bankruptcy. It's a whole drawn out process. Do the creditors ever get paid? Sometimes I've had people who come to realize that the wage garnishment on, their wages is going to go through for a week or two before they realize they should file a bankruptcy. And as a result, their wage gets whacked. But again, that's subject to certain exemptions under mass laws. So, the loss can't be that great. They don't really give a shit. I think it enables them to, when a person files a bankruptcy, it enables them to close the book on the case. The account gets closed. It's not a question, can they collect anymore? It's if it's an assetless case, they got nothing and that's it. So it sort of, enables them to just be done with it. It's when the case remains open. I had a guy, he was sued by all these creditors, and for 10 years, I think it was more than 10 years, he made the minimum payments. And in the 12th year, one of the claims got picked up by a new law firm, and he discovered that even though he had made 12 years of payments, he owed the same amount of money now that he owed when he started. And he then filed a bankruptcy, and he became done with it. But, that's the thing that can happen.
But he lost 10 years of those minimum payments.
Oh, and he has every record, every payment. He wrote it down. Shoot me now.
He wrote it down. You're like, no.
Yeah, you should have seen his records. It was like
longer than a CVS receipt.
Oh, I would say Radio Shack, but you're too young.
Oh no, I remember Radio Shack.
Radio Shack was the CVS of its day. Yeah, I was just talking to a good friend of mine who actually Radio Shack had a program. All you listeners, you could be part of their Battery of the Month club. Every month, you could go in and get a free battery.
A single battery.
A 9-volt, AA or AAA, whatever you happen to need. You had a little card. I grew up, a very good friend of mine growing up. He was an inveterate. Every month he stopped in at Radio Shack. And then another good friend of mine, who happens to be a former Eagle Scout, it didn't surprise me when he told me he was a member of the Battery of the Month Club either. I found it quite interesting. And when Radio Shack went out of business, I don't know what they did with themselves.
Had a bunch of dead batteries.
Well, my friend, the Eagle Scout, he used to make a lot of money. He happens to be a lawyer. He made a lot of money finding change in telephones, but they don't do that either anymore. So
yeah, running out of ideas.
Now he just holds people up now. It makes life easy.
He's doing all right, the Eagle Scout.
Well, I tell you, once when I was much younger, I ran into a guy. He used to ask people for spare change at the subway station at Grand Central Station. Dressed in a suit, he carried an attaché case, and his shtick was that he'd lost his wallet and he needed to get back to Westchester. So I started chatting with him. He was making like $2,000 a week, cash. People were giving him. It's like, I want to go to law school. Who's the schmuck? But here I am.
That's amazing. Would never fly
I
today.
can tell you about the guy who used to sell rolling paper on the corner of 6th Avenue and 51st. He used to go to Florida in the warm weather.
I can't wait to hear more of these stories. But I am curious, you said a lot of the cases or proceedings are now online. So what happens if creditors don't show up to a hearing or file a claim in the bankruptcy case?
Well, sometimes creditors in an assetless case will file a proof of claim because they're accounting purposes, they have to do it. But generally, in an asset case, the creditors will get a notice to file proofs of claim. And only creditors who actually file proofs of claim get part of a dividend in an asset case. But otherwise, if they don't, then their debt is discharged and they missed out. Life goes on. It's the same way as Chapter 13 works that way. Let's say a debtor has $100,000 worth of debt and they propose a 10 cent on the dollar plan based on their, disposable income, whatever. And only $20,000 worth of creditors file proofs of claim. Then the net effect is a 50% plan because that 10 cents is going to go a lot farther.
I am actually curious. This is the last question, Barry. So it's going to be a heavy hitter. I'm just kidding. You tell me. How do creditors decide whether to challenge a bankruptcy filing or discharge of certain debts? Like, is there
it has to do, the way to do it is creditors have a certain point in time to file a complaint objecting to the debtor's discharge. They can do it generally, I think it's 523, I don't have the bankruptcy code in front of me, or under 727, which means they become a non-dischargeable debtor. It all depends on how the claim came about. On the other hand, there is the Office of the United States Trustee, they're from the government and they're here to help, and they can file complaints objecting to people's discharge too. I've been involved, not representing the debtors, I'm involved with them now, in a number of cases where the debtor has been declared. I mean, in one case, there was a gentleman who owned a chain of some sort of health Michigan, so I don't know what they were doing, And he bought a house down on the Cape, and he put the house in his buddy's name. He used the house, his family used the house, it was in his friend's name, and he was declared a non-dischargeable debtor. It can happen. The reality of the situation is if there are no assets and someone is declared a non-dischargeable debtor, it's meaningless, because if there's nothing to get, there's nothing to get. And again, I have a story for everything. I was contacted by people, they were an Asian family, and unfortunately, I find it very, terrible when landsmen take advantage of landsmen, if you know what I'm saying. And this gentleman was going to open up a nail salon. And this, I don't think they're husband and wife, but they convinced this guy, he was paying them. He thought they convinced him they were building out a nail salon for him. And then they were paying him rent. He thought he was paying the rent on his nail salon. And it turned out it was completely bogus. As a result, he wound up with a claim for about $750,000, and one of the debtors, the woman, is in the process of being declared a non-dischargeable debtor by the Office of the United States Trustee. My creditor had the same opportunity, but you reach a point, she has nothing. So what are you chasing? I mean, you have to realize reality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If every one of my clients who creditors said had money in a sock actually had money in a sock, I wouldn't be here today either. But, it never happens. It's all bullshit. you have to be adult enough when you're a creditor to realize that you may take a hit. I mean, especially, I'm not talking about Citibank and Bank of America. Joe Schmo lends money. You have to figure you're going to lose it. Getting it back is a bonus. That's how I look at it.
You raise an interesting point. When most of your cases, would you say that they're primarily from large financial institutions, or are they from individual LLC, sole proprietor?
Yeah, I would say it's a mix. When you have, I represent a lot of small businesses, and lately the government's largesse during COVID, they were lending money to everybody. And a lot of these businesses may have survived COVID as a result of the loan, but were not meant to be going forward. And what's happened is the companies have been liquidated, and the individuals now are, they have an SBA loan, or they have, a bank loan, which is guaranteed by the SBA. In addition, they have, the interesting thing is people don't necessarily know when they have a corporate American Express card that they're personally liable for it. You look at all those corporate cards, it always has the employee's name on it.
Right.
So you become liable for your charges. Maybe you're lucky and your business pays them, but if the business doesn't, you're liable.
So that's only if your name is also on the business credit card.
And most of them, most of them are, because businesses are here today, gone tomorrow.
I mean, they go through every single angle. That is wild. Oh my gosh. Barry, thank you so much. And I'll give you your second to do your spiel in a sec.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us on Through the Looking Glass with Barry Levine. You can connect with Barry at levineslaw.com. Please be sure to follow, subscribe, comment, and review the show on your favorite platform. We love having you as a part of our community. Barry, thanks again for being here, and we'll see you next time.
It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.